folks. You're listening to the Jobs Podcast. I am your host, Tim Hendricks. Your time is valuable. I'm not going to waste it. Let's get right to the interview. Good day, folks. Thank you for joining me on the Jobs Podcast. This is Tim Hendricks. We've got a great guest with us today. If you've spent any time in and around Southwest Missouri, the weatherman that is meteorologist known as Brandon Beck is someone you are familiar with, and we have him as our guest today. So welcome, Brandon.
Good morning, or I guess afternoon, or whenever this is.
Yeah, whenever they're listening to it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. I forget that I'm just dating myself, aren't I?
I think we're about the same age. I'm 50.
Exactly how I'm old. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, I know what a podcast is. It's in my head that most of my waking hours are in the morning. So that's what I tell people.
You probably have to get up pretty early in the morning to get to the studio. Is that correct?
Yeah, my alarm goes off at 2:30.
Ooh, my goodness.
Yeah, so a lot of times when I tell somebody that, they sort of give me the deer in the headlights look like, you mean AM?
Yes.
Indeed, yes.
AM. Well, let's start with the origins of Brandon. Tell us where you were born, your early upbringing, your family members, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Okay. Was born in Searcy, Arkansas. So for you Arkansas listeners, you're probably thinking, hey, he's one of us. For some of you may be thinking, well, that explains a lot. Searcy is just about an hour northeast of Little Rock, not far off the interstate. And my parents both went to Harding University down there. Mm-hmm. And they married, I think they were 21 and 20, something like that. So I was born there. My grandparents lived there as well. And believe I the family moved to a suburb of St. Louis called Baldwin when I was, I don't know how old, 4 or 5, something like that, and lived there just a few years. My parents divorced. My dad kind of took off when I was 7, and he moved to Colorado, which actually is where my mother's family was from, different town. He moved to Denver. And then not too shortly after that, we moved back to Northeast Colorado in a little farming community. So that was age 7. And then I was in Colorado until I came back to Springfield for college. Oh. So most of my growing up years were in Colorado, which tells you why I'm a Denver Broncos fan. Some people ask, well, why in the world? You've been in Missouri for 20 some years, almost 30 years. Mm-hmm. Like, well, that's true, but it helps keep the rivalry going. Although certainly Chiefs fans have a whole lot more to be excited about than Broncos fans, and have had for years.
They are on a run, but we all can agree that we hate the Raiders. Is that right?
Yes. We have some common ground there. Yeah.
There we go.
Have for years.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was at a young age, I don't remember specifically. My mom tells me, from 7, 8 years old, I was fascinated with weather. I don't remember it being that early, but I can remember at least in the 3rd, maybe 4th grade, where I woke up from a nap because there was golf ball hail hitting my bedroom window. And I was fascinated by that. And I thought, well, how are these big ice balls coming out of the sky? And so I began to read and do some of the, research. And of course, this was long before the internet. I've been fascinated with it ever since. So that's kind of the very beginning of it anyway.
Yeah. What did you, when you got to college, you've graduated, you've moved back to Missouri, you're starting college. Did you know from the get-go that you wanted to do something in weather, or was it more you wanted to be in entertainment and they just kind of melded, or how did the whole career kind of play out?
Well, my high school, believe it or not, in Northeast Colorado, it's a little town called Holyoke. Mm-hmm. When my mom remarried, I was 13, and she married the only doctor in a town of about 2,000 people. So that matches the size of several communities in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas.
Yeah.
But where I grew up, he was the only doctor. We had one stoplight, no fast food joints, a little bit different out there. So it's basically cows and corn.
Right.
And wheat, but it was an agricultural community. And so I grew up in that area where if somebody had trouble paying their medical bill, well, there would be bags of produce that show up on our doorstep. And my stepdad just kind of bartered with people. And we had sweet corn for dinner, big old gunny sacks of sweet corn. That stuff's just so good. I
Yes.
mean, I turned into a swine with the butter and sweet corn. It was just crazy. But point is, small town high school, 46 in my graduating class, but they had a TV production class.
Oh.
And they had what for that day and age was pretty decent equipment. And so I kind of got involved in the broadcasting end of it. And they did a short little newscast once a week. And of course, with my fascination with weather, that's the angle I took. And they had a green screen and everything.
Hmm.
And my teacher pulled me aside one day and he said, "Hey, you're pretty bleeping good at this, and maybe you ought to look into this when you go to school." I was like, "Oh, okay." Um, Wanted to go to a Christian university. I looked at Oral Roberts University down in Tulsa, I believe it is, and then Evangel here in Springfield. And to me, it was night and day. The broadcasting part here at Evangel has always had a good reputation, and they had a high placement rate with their graduates. And I thought, okay, well, here I am. And the rest is kind of, I got the degree in broadcasting because they didn't offer meteorology, but I continued to pursue that, when I had a chance to do weather on their news program at
Hmm.
Evangel. The assistant news director at KY3 at the time, his name was Hyler Cooper. And the newscast that we did and some other programming, and I think it's still the same today, was on the cable access channel through Mediacom. And so people could flip through and, oh, look, there's Evangel. And I'm not joking with this. The story goes that he came across our newscast and thought we were so bad, he should come help us. And his wife said, "So why don't you go help?" So he did. We were on Tuesday nights and he volunteered his time. He came over and, kind of walked us through things and helped us, with scripting and, just different things from a professional point of view, somebody in the industry. And so he watched me do weather and he said, "Hey, I think Marcy should see this." And Marcy was the news director at KY3 at the time.
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, I got another year before I graduate." He said, "Oh." So I had a full beard at that time. I kind of looked older, I guess.
Hmm.
So long story short, God worked out those specifics. And when I was about to graduate, Melissa Ward was on the air doing weekends, and Fred Miller was about to retire. For those that have lived here a really long time, Fred Miller was on. I don't remember the year he left or he retired, but I had interned at KY3 and then the opening came in and I got hired to do weekends. I never had to send out a single resume tape. Started at KY3 and I've been there ever since. So my next anniversary here in a couple of months will be 29 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm old. Well,
Well,
relatively
no.
speaking, I guess you and I are the same age, as you said. So,
Well, we're not old. We're just smack dab in the middle of not a kid anymore, I think is how they
yes,
say it. So yeah.
although I can act like one still.
Yeah,
So,
right. I'm right there with you. So I can see your education and your training and the advice and the nurturing that you received on the broadcasting side of things. The weather side of things, are you essentially just self-taught from your passion for it and your constant soaking of information about meteorology?
some of it is, yes. But when I got hired at KY3, so I did weather on the weekends,
Okay.
and somewhere I still have that tape. And I look back at it and think, they hired me? I mean, it's anybody who's green at what they're doing. And,
Yeah.
I just thought, man, I don't know that I would have hired me, but okay. Um, Part of the deal was they were going to send me to, I say send me. Back in my day, there was a correspondence program through Mississippi State University. They actually still have it.
Hmm.
And it was built specifically for people in the broadcasting field. And so it was the broadcast meteorology program. And so it took out some of the gen ed stuff and, the heavy duty math, that type of thing, and really focused on the hands on everyday weather stuff, forecasting, that type of thing. And so while it's not a full 4-year degree, they call it the Certificate in Broadcast Meteorology. I was short of a degree by a handful of classes. And part of the reason I didn't do it is they wanted 2 years of foreign language.
Hmm.
And I thought, man, I'm never going to work at Telemundo. Didn't want to go to
Right.
South Texas. I thought, man, that's just a waste of time and money to me.
Yeah.
So I didn't pursue that. But got the certificate and certified through the American Meteorological Society. And so, I do the continued education with Weather Service and different things. And I mean, in any field, I think you can always keep learning. But
Mm.
that's especially true with certain fields, and weather's one of them. As technology advances and we learn more about the atmosphere and better ways to monitor it, there's always something new to learn.
What has changed? I mean, a lot's changed in your career. You've been doing this for so long now. You've seen waves and substantial improvements in weather prediction, storm prediction, things of that nature.
Sure.
But what are the big things, like the big two or three, that have changed in your career that has made your job easier, better, more exciting, more precise?
Well, because a lot of it is either using computers or computer driven. I mean, anybody who's anywhere close to our age can think back maybe to the first computer they had at home.
Yeah, Commodore
um,
64.
I had an Apple IIe at
Oh,
school. I'm trying to remember the name of the game I played. I mean, we had those 5.25-inch floppies, and that's how you booted the machine, let alone ran any
yep.
software.
Hmm.
Not Missile Command. That was an Atari game. Oh, I can't think of it, but it was a monochrome green monitor, and these little helicopters would fly over and drop bombs, or no, paratroopers, and you had to shoot them with your turret gun. I honestly spent hours playing that game, and so compared to what they have now, it's just night
Yeah,
and day.
right.
But anyway, as technology advanced, when I started, we had what at that point in time were powerful computers. I mean, by today's standards, our smartphones and smartwatches are bigger and better, but they had a limited capability for animating graphics and things like that. And it was a bit of a process to get those things to air. It took a lot more time, and they weren't nearly as pretty. We didn't have the ability to plot as much data on them and that type of thing.
Hmm.
Computer modeling was in its relative infancy stage. And, if you can think of, I'm trying to get a way to visualize this, but it went from pretty archaic and going out 48 hours to what is now modeling that goes out 16 days. Now, that
Wow.
doesn't mean you can trust it,
Right.
but it has the capability. So think of a map like a graph paper. And so you have a series of grids or a grid. And let's say that you lay that down on a map, and between every grid point or intersection is, let's say, 3 kilometers.
Okay.
Now, cover the whole globe with that. And then above every point, do 65 or so vertical layers. Multiply that times, let's just say 40 different atmospheric variables, and then forecast that out every 6 hours. That's what a global computer model does, and it runs every 6 hours.
Wow.
So it's computing a global forecast for 65 or so layers, and I'm just throwing that number out, for a point every 3 kilometers across the globe. That's pretty amazing, and it takes a lot of computer power to do it. The latest itineration that I know of from the National Weather Service, and it's always growing, so I probably should look up whether they've upgraded, but it's something like 2 trillion calculations a second.
Man.
And that's not the fastest on the planet by any means. I think it was at the time the 12th fastest or something like that. But as we get more computing power,
Mhm.
then you can run more high res simulations with finer detail over longer periods of time and do it in a shorter amount of time computer wise. And so, when we do something on TV and we show you the latest term that the consultants love is hour by hour.
Yeah.
Those are all high resolution, and they may go through 72 hours, and those run several times a day. Or we have some that run every hour, but they only go out, say, 15 hours. So they're designed to keep up with more, like thunderstorms as they develop or something like that. The bottom line is we have so much data now, you can really get lost in it. When you're making a forecast, you can say, well, I'm going to look at this model, this model, this model, this model. And then every one of those models has different variations called ensembles. You really can start drowning in the data. And at the end of it, go, okay, now what do I think is going to happen? So you have to kind of filter it, narrow it down, and over time, learn which ones have better performance in certain situations and use those as guidance to develop a forecast.
The accuracy that you get from a system like that is really that makes your job better as far as
Sure.
predicting where, hooks and things when we have severe weather and whatnot. You're talking,
Right.
and I've watched you on the news as well as others talk about if you're in this particular area, you might want to seek shelter now. You can really kind of dial that into, I mean, are you talking a few miles, a mile? How accurate can you typically get on stuff like that?
Well, so think of it, and I'll back up a little bit. Computer modeling is just one part of the whole puzzle.
Okay.
So think of it as a forecast funnel. So take a funnel that you put oil in your car or in the kitchen or whatever. The top of that funnel, that is the widest point, that's days out. Let's say it's, somewhere in the 6 to 8 day range. And you may have an idea that says, you know what, most of the computer models agree we're going to have some cold air arrive during that time frame. Some of them spin up this massive snowstorm, but we don't really know yet. It's too far out. That's an example of something in the long range. And then as you get closer, the funnel narrows because you have a better feel for what's really going on in the atmosphere. For instance, the storm that we had earlier in the month, that we got about 6 inches of snow in Springfield, biggest
Hmm.
snow in 3 years or something like
Yeah.
that.
Been a while.
4 days out, I am not going to put out snow forecast yet as far as amounts go, because I know it is probably going to change between 0 days and 4 days. So once you get down to a day or two, then you typically have a pretty good feel. Like today, we're forecasting the potential heavy rain in spots of southern Missouri for Thursday. Pretty high confidence on that. It really gets tricky when you're talking about a degree or two swing that can make the difference between freezing rain
Mm.
or sleet and freezing rain. I mean, that gets real dicey, but it gives us a better feel for what's going to happen. Now, when you're talking about severe weather like thunderstorms and tornadoes, we can have a general idea several days out on the kind of pattern that is favorable to produce those. And that's why the Storm Prediction Center will put an outlook out that says on day 3, there's a level 2 risk over this area. And then as we get closer, they may say, okay, wait, this is now a level 4. That's a little more rare. But that comes down to short term, very specific details that have to be in place. And so it's the whole funnel idea again. When you're detecting this kind of stuff, as of 2012, we went from a Doppler radar to a dual polarity or dual pole Doppler radar. And among the very many benefits that that gives us is the ability to see debris in the air. So
Hmm.
we know when a tornado has developed and touched down versus just being able to say, well, we think there could be. there still is a tornado warning issued based on rotation, but then we will be able to say, hey, this is actually occurring and it's causing damage, whether or not anybody's there to actually see it happening, because we can see it on radar.
So, is that a radar that I would be able to see if I'm watching you on TV, or is that more of a
Yes.
special? Okay. All right.
Yeah. So if you've ever watched, and by the way, that was an upgrade the National Weather Service did. Oh gosh, I want to say starting in 2010 or 2011, Springfield, which covers most of southern Missouri with its radar,
Mhm.
that was upgraded in 2012. And it was just before the leap day tornadoes, one of which went down the Branson Strip.
Yeah.
And that was the first real example in the United States of the dual polarity radar actually showing these tornadic signatures. And that happened in the middle of the night, for those that don't remember. And it developed on the west side of Table Rock Lake and came across Stone County into Branson. And the Weather Service was able to issue warnings because of the debris signature before it hit Branson. So it was kind of a test case in a sense, but they were able to go back and look at the data and say, yep, the training that we got on this based on the test they did in the Oklahoma City area over years, it was legitimate. Like, hey, this is really cool. And that was before we had access to it at KY3
Hmm.
and most broadcast stations. But now, during severe weather coverage, we can bring up this virtual control panel on the screen and start switching between this radar and that radar. And now we're going to show you the wind, and you can see this little rotation in the storm. Hey, now we have a debris signature. So, those of you northeast of this intersection, that's just an example. So,
Right.
we can actually show it on TV.
What is the general, I guess, lead time that you would get with this new radar technology for severe weather? Can you tell, look, this is looking very problematic in about 15 minutes, 10 minutes? I know it's not an exact science, but I can only assume it's gotten better over the years with more advanced warning. Is
Well,
there a certain time frame?
it depends on the kind of situation that you're dealing with,
Okay.
meaning if you have a setup where you have supercell tornadoes, and these are the ones that are typically the big ones that you may see on TV from Oklahoma or Kansas. I mean, nowadays, everybody's got the smartphone and can shoot video.
Yeah.
And if you look at a map during a level 4 or 5 risk day, these storm chasers that are out there plotting their location on the map, it looks like a swarm of bees. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
But on those kinds of days, when you're looking at supercell storms, meaning the individual ones that may move at 30 or 40 miles an hour, those are the ones that a lead time is usually much longer than, say, a line of storms that's moving quickly to the east and you get these small tornadic spin ups along the line. You may have 5 minutes in some of those cases.
Okay.
It's not always that low,
Right.
but the latest lead time based on the American Meteorological Society, I just looked at this conference paper, the average is about 18 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And that's pretty stinking good
Yes, it is.
compared to what it was, say back in the 90s, where it may have been, I think the average at that point was 5 minutes.
Yeah.
One thing that has not changed much is the false alarm ratio.
Hmm.
And so, you know, at the basic level, we are still looking at thunderstorms for rotation, number one. And like I said, usually a few days out, we can tell, hey, there's this big upper low coming in. There's going to be plenty of moisture. It looks like we're going to have enough instability. Here's where the wind fields line up. So we're going to warn people in this general vicinity, say southern Missouri to western Illinois, that there could be some big time severe weather that day. Then when we get to that day, we're waiting for storms to develop. We're still watching Number one, for rotation within the storms. It's not always as obvious as some big hook echo. It can be, but it's not always that way. So the first thing we'll watch for is rotation, and most of the warnings are issued based on that rotation. But over the years, only about 25% of those cases actually result in a tornado.
Hmm.
And that number hasn't changed a whole lot, even as the technology has advanced, because of what we use to trigger those warnings. Now, we can tell you for sure if one has occurred because of the debris signature. And you know as well as I do, if I get on TV and say, hey, there's a tornado warning for the potential of a tornado because we see rotation, if I get on and say, hey, there's a tornado occurring and it's chewing up real estate, that's going to get people more motivated
Yeah.
than, hey, there could be one. And we
Mhm.
have the ability now to differentiate between the two, but the warning is going to be issued based on rotation, and it may or may not occur.
Hmm. The radars that you were talking about, the Doppler radar, and then what was the name of the new one?
Dual polarity Doppler. It's still Doppler.
Okay.
The difference is when we say a radar beam, it's a beam that's actually made up of pulses of energy. So we can control the frequency of it, but let's just say, as a general rule, it's 300 pulses per second.
Okay.
And when you think about this in your mind, it actually is pretty amazing that we're able to show what we show. But as the radar dish spins, it's emanating 300 pulses per second and then listening for each one of those to come back because it's at the speed of light. This is
Mhm.
electromagnetic pulses, and each one of those pulses goes out and then bounces off of whatever it hits, and a certain portion of that energy comes back to the radar dish.
Hmm.
And depending on what it's hitting, that frequency may shift based on the movement of what it's hitting. That's the Doppler effect. And then in the case of this new radar, it will send out alternating horizontal and vertical pulses and listen for each of those and then compare the two. That's all clear
Wow.
as mud, right?
No, it's fascinating.
So think of if you had a pencil in each hand, hold one horizontal and one vertical. That's the difference in the pulses that are being sent out. So in the dual polarity, that's what it means, is it's comparing not only how much of that energy is returned, but the frequency change that occurs. And because it's comparing a horizontal and vertical pulse, we can actually know the size and shape of what we're hitting. So nowadays, if we tell you, hey, baseball size hail is likely in this storm in this location, there's going to be baseball size hail falling somewhere under that storm in the vicinity of where we say. Almost slam dunk. Radar, the equations that they use, the algorithms now are incredibly accurate from what they used to be. And so that combined with the weather balloons that go up, we know based on the temperature profile, the moisture profile, okay, thunderstorms would have the potential to produce the maximum hail of this size. And if radar detects it in the cloud, somebody's going to get that size of hail underneath it most of the time. It's incredible to me that that has evolved to that point. And we're also able to say, hey, we're hitting really, if you look at the color table on the radar now, and we don't go this deep into it on TV, is it wet snow or dry snow?
You can tell
Yeah, it
all the
really
day.
can. We can
Wow.
tell where the freezing layer is. We can tell whether it's going to be golf ball hail or baseball hail. We can tell how big the raindrops are. Now, we're not going to get on TV and say, hey, if you live in Branson, you're going to get 3 millimeter size raindrops.
Right.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
But it can tell us, hey, there's torrential rain right here. There's more likely to be flooding in this area. The
Hmm.
hail's going to be this big. The wind's going to be this strong. There's a lot that we can tell from radar data that we couldn't tell before. A higher resolution too, so it's more accurate.
What's the layout of these Doppler radars and how far do they typically scan? Is it laid out in a grid over the United States or is it just up to the states or how does that work?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because there's a company trying to come in. They are working with the National Weather Service, and they've had, I believe it was $100 million investment from a startup hedge fund or something like that. And they are going through and trying to fill the gaps. So essentially, think of a map of the middle of the country, and I'll just name some radars here. Springfield's one of them, Little Rock, Arkansas, Fort Smith, Arkansas, Tulsa, Wichita, Kansas City, St. Louis, and Paducah, Kentucky. Those are
Hmm.
the ones right around our vicinity.
Okay.
But they can scan roughly 300 miles. But the farther you go away from the radar, the higher the beam is in the air because of the curve of the Earth.
Okay.
So in Springfield's case, from the radar, once you get out about 60 miles, you're a mile up. It's actually, no, it's about 40 miles that you're a mile in the air now.
Hmm.
So, in research, the National Weather Service did about a decade ago now. They looked at 5 years worth of these tornadoes that we typically get, which are along these big lines of storms. Supercell tornadoes are not nearly as common here as they are to the west of us in Oklahoma and Kansas in the traditional tornado alley.
Hmm.
We can get them here. They're just not as common because most of them develop to the west and then they blossom into this ginormous line that blasts through here with high winds and sometimes tornadoes, but they're usually weaker. They're usually EF zeros to sometimes EF twos. EF3 and beyond is more rare. But they did some research over 5 years, and I forget how many tornado cases they looked at. And they went back and said, okay, based on the environment and the radar signature, the distance they were, the locations, all this kind of stuff, they determined that the majority of these tornadoes that develop in lines happen under 5,000 feet. That's where they originate.
Hmm.
And so the basic payoff for that, or what we learned from that, is that there are some significant gaps in the radar coverage. So the best coverage is going to be closer to the radar. But if you look at the distance between Wichita and Springfield, or Springfield and Kansas City, or Springfield and St. Louis, that beam is high enough that we may be missing some of the lower level stuff once you get out towards, say, Lebanon or Rolla
Hmm.
or, Houston, Missouri, or West Plains. And so this company is trying to come in and install radars in between the National Weather Service radars and give the Weather Service access to that data to help detect some of those more dangerous storms that they may be shooting over the top of with the current infrastructure. Those big radars that the Weather Service has, those dishes are 25 feet wide and they are called S band. There's different frequencies that they can use, but they have the biggest penetration through multiple lines of storms. Once you get down towards smaller radars that are shorter wavelengths, they're C band and then X band. And I know I'm getting into the weeds here,
It's okay.
but the X band radars are about 10 times the resolution on a screen that you would see from the National Weather Service.
Hmm.
The problem with them is that when you have big lines of storms, then they don't penetrate them as well. So they're basically meant to have shorter ranges but higher resolution, and they're filling these low level gaps between the National Weather Service radars. So it's going to be a fascinating thing. They've installed, I believe, oh gosh, about 15 of them are in the country so far in, I
Okay.
want to say, 8 different states. Their next stop, hopefully, will be a couple over the northern Arkansas, southern Missouri area later this year. But it would eventually, they're hoping to install 200 across the country,
Wow.
which is an incredible thing. And hopefully that will help. We've come a long way, but hopefully that will help in those more iffy situations when the National Weather Service issues a tornado warning for, way out toward West Plains. They're hitting those storms, 2 or 3 miles high. Now, in the grand scheme of things, a big thunderstorm can be, 60,000 feet tall. I mean, we're talking in the biggest cases, somewhere between 10 and 13 miles high. Those are massive. So when you think about hitting those at 2 or 3 miles up, okay, you're still getting a good part of the storm. But in terms of tornado potential, most tornadoes happen under that layer. So
Okay.
we're trying to get as close to the ground as we can in order to determine that. Hail is a little bit different because it gets lofted so stinking high in the storm that we can see it a lot higher up than we would be able to see a tornado. If we're seeing a tornado circulation 3 or 4 miles into a storm, then it's a pretty deep circulation. That still does not mean that it's going to absolutely produce a tornado. And that's the mystery of the whole thing. Sometimes storms that we could say, oh my gosh, there's got to be something there
Yeah.
based on the rotation. Nope. And then other times, yeah, we don't think it's doing anything. And then we get a report, oh, it is. Okay. And that's the mystery of it. And that what research is still trying to learn. Why do some do it and some don't? When based on what we know, we would bet against a tornado versus other times where we would say there's got to be one and there isn't. So,
Before we get back to your career aspect of things, I do have one question that parlays from what we were just talking about.
okay.
Satellite imagery. How are satellites factored into? You talked about the height of a storm.
Uh-huh.
Does there come a point where I need to go to the space guys and see what they got going on up there? I mean, you can see obviously hurricanes. We've all seen the huge images where you can see the eye and things. But do you utilize satellite imagery very much for your day-to-day forecasts, or is it more just it's good information to have, or it's on a much larger scale?
Absolutely. Every day.
Okay.
The imagery that we typically show on TV that we use the most are from the GOES satellite. That's an acronym for geostationary. Let's see if I can remember this. It's geostationary operational environmental satellite. Um, they always have to come up with some clever little name for it. Back when I first started, so we have one that's over the Pacific and one that's over the Western Atlantic. And the two combined, goes west and goes east, give us a comprehensive view of the United States. Goes east, once we get to, I believe it's May, is moved slightly eastward so that it can catch the western side of Africa during hurricane season.
Okay.
And so these things are about 22,500 miles above the Earth, way higher than most other satellites
Mm.
that are in low Earth orbit, such as Starlink or the satellites used for direct TV or dish TV. I mean, most of those things are just for communication. They're much, much lower toward the Earth. But the GOES satellites, we used to get an image every 30 minutes. And that's how we provided the satellite loops, so to speak, of the clouds over the United States. Now we get images every 5 minutes.
Wow.
And not only that, but they're down to a kilometer resolution versus 15 kilometers. So literally, and this is the coolest thing, and I geek out over this stuff, but they can provide rapid scan technology, for instance, during an expected severe weather outbreak, they will set a sector up, or in a hurricane, where it will take images every 30 seconds. And so you can literally watch thunderstorms develop in real time from space,
Man.
or the eye in a hurricane spin. I mean, it's just fascinating to watch. So, in the broad scheme of things, for instance, this morning when I went in to do a forecast, I know that there's an upper low that was sitting off the California coast and it's kind of oozing eastward. So, one of the first things I do is I plot a surface map and I draw my lines and my fronts and things. And then I look at satellite and upper air charts and I say, okay, based on the weather balloon soundings, this is where the lowest pressure is at a certain level of the atmosphere. Now let's match that up with satellite. Yep, there it is, spinning along. There's a water vapor channel that we can look at and says, okay, this is where the jet stream is flowing. We match that with computer models to see if they have the right initialization. If they think the jet stream should be in this area and that matches satellite, okay, that's a good. So it's a piece of the puzzle that multiple tools that we use to create the forecast that you see every day. It's not just one thing or the other. When it comes to radar, it's not predicting necessarily as much as it is detecting. And certainly we can use that data to say, okay, well, the line of storms has moved this far in this much time. So we can estimate when it will be down the road in, a half hour, whatever it is. But radar is much more for right now and over the next hour or two.
Okay.
Whereas satellite might be a little longer than that. And then computer modeling can be from later today to a week down the road.
So, in your line of work, I mean, everybody has an app on their phone and they can
Oh,
see,
yeah.
okay, well, it may rain today or something, but there's so much data out there to be more precise and accurate and also following the trends and the ebb and flow of weather. That's where your experience, your education, your expertise kind of plays in to
Hmm.
present the big picture to the viewers.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think most smartphones now, and I don't know who sits at the table across from Apple or Samsung, but most of those phones come with a pre-installed weather app.
Yes.
I think a lot of it is the Weather Channel. Some of it's AccuWeather. I'm not sure what all the ones are out there.
Hmm.
Most of those apps, and even the KY3 weather app to an extent, is the data is populated. The forecast is populated by that grid that I mentioned, um, and the forecast from different models.
Hmm.
We will go in and edit that forecast to match our forecast on the air. So for those around the Springfield area, which we draw a zone that kind of includes down in Ozark and down to Highlandville. There's a separate zone for Branson and the Table Rock Lake area. There's another zone that includes Harrison. We can kind of determine that, and then if need be, then we'll go in and edit that forecast to match what we think is going to happen versus what the model thinks. Now,
Oh,
when you're down to the hourly forecast, like at 1 o'clock, it's going to be this many degrees. Golly, you could chase that all day.
sure.
So we
Sure.
don't really change that much. But when it comes to, hey, by let's say what today's Tuesday, let's say there's a winter storm coming in, the app will automatically fill in based on the weather models. Hey, you're going to get this many inches of snow on Friday. Let's not exert panic. I can tell you, Windows now, if you've ever watched in Windows 10 and up, down in your system tray, you'll see sometimes some little blurb about the weather, crashing temps or snow
Right.
expected Tuesday or whatever it is. I remember going back before this last storm, Windows popped up one morning while I was doing my forecast that said 6 inches of snow expected Sunday. I was like, according to who? And I remember telling the weather service, well, Microsoft Windows is really helping with this whole panic thing about the snow on Sunday.
Right.
So all that data is out there, and various programs and weather apps can go grab that to give people at least a general idea. But, as far as our app, we try to make it match what we think is going to happen. So it's a mixture of our forecast and a computer's forecast, depending on what time frame we're talking about.
Hmm. You told me at the beginning of the show that you get up about 2:30 in the morning, I think was when your alarm goes off,
Yep.
and you walk me through, because I'm sure people are curious what your morning is like. We all get up, we have our coffee or whatever, and we drive to work. I get up at 4 and go to work. What's the morning like for a meteorologist on television? When you walk into the office, you say hi to the security guy, or how's that kind of play out?
Well, I typically, when I get up at 2:30, I shower the night before, so I, do the whole brush your teeth, shave thing. Don't have to worry about hair in my case. So it's a pretty quick prep. Yeah, I usually leave the house right about 3, get to work about 3:15, and so the show on air starts at 5 o'clock. So in the time between when I get there and the show starts, obviously I got to make the forecast. So I go through all of the analysis and looking at models and satellite and all that sort of stuff. And I have a sheet that's, I go through and I label the days and go through and basically fill it out as I go. And then I usually wrap up with that about 4 o'clock. And listen, Ron Hurst, when he comes in, he spends in his process a couple of hours
Hmm.
looking at it. The difference is every meteorologist will have kind of a different, what's the word I'm looking for? Not rigmarole, routine that
Yeah,
they go through,
sure.
and things that they've learned over the years that they want to look at and whatnot. And his is pretty extensive, but at the same time, when I go, there's not another soul in that studio. So I've got the quiet and I can concentrate on it. Whereas when Ron comes in, the whole building's full of people, and you got people coming in asking him questions and the phone's ringing. And
Yeah.
so it's a little more. I finish the forecast at about 4. Then I go into the newsroom and I talk to the producers for the morning. Now, our morning show is 4 hours now. When I started, by the way, on the morning, which was in 2000, it was 30 minutes.
Wow.
I sort of long for those days sometimes
Sure.
when I could roll in at, 5:30 in the morning and then be done with the show at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
But what I tend to do is I go in and I brief the producers. There's usually 3 of them. And I tell them, hey, here's what I'm looking at. Because sometimes the show will, at some level, revolve around what the weather's doing. And so, but several days out, I don't want them to write something in the script for the anchors that says, well, Brandon, we're really looking at a good warm up. When in reality, I'm saying, no, guys, that there's an Arctic front coming.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to sound stupid, and I don't want it to be me if I can help it. I do that enough on my own.
Yeah.
But that way, everybody, because I'm on the same page, they know what the weather's going to do. And
Sure.
so they'll say, okay, here's what I've got written. That's great. And certainly there's some ad lib for the anchors in there too. My part is all ad lib. So I brief them, I come back in, I open the software and start typing in numbers. There's a kind of a centralized hub essentially where I type in my numbers, I choose the icons, I type in the wording for the weather app, and then our weather graphics go and grab that information and it auto updates. That way I don't have to go in and type a number 6 different times.
Hmm.
It's kind of helpful. So anyway,
Yeah.
I get done with that around 4:30. I go put my face on, which for me is just some powder to take the shine off. I mean, this is reason number 237. I'm glad I'm not a woman
Right.
because it's so much easier.
Mhm.
But then I go in and, during the Today Show, when you see Al Roker give his little weather and say, here's what's happening in your neck of the woods, and then I pop on, that's recorded.
Okay.
because we're still in the middle of our show. We're
Yeah.
still on hours 2 and 3, or 3 and 4 rather, while the Today Show is playing. So those little 30-second weathers are recorded prior to us beginning our show. So between 4:30 and about 4:40, I record. Golly, I forget the number. A lot of different 1 minute and 30-second forecasts that will air on Good Morning America and the Today Show, um, KY3 24/7, Weather Nation, which is that's the combo there, Branson Visitor TV. When I get all that done, come back to the desk and I record radio weather forecasts. And I've got 4 different station groups that I record those for. And I believe there is a total of about 20 different cuts that I will do. And I wrap that up at about 4:55, and then it's go time. So
Wow.
the show is 4 hours. I do that. And in the middle of my hits during that, I'm recording a forecast that goes out to the weather app. I'm recording a short little video that I upload to the website, snapping graphics for social media, all that sort of stuff. I mean, back in the day, it was TV and that's it. And now we've got the internet, the social media, and believe it or not, we call it the whale. But as a person who has a Facebook page, so to speak, I can go in there and look at the analytics or I can see what time most people log on. And starting at about 6 a.m. when people get up, one of the first things they do is they look at their phone and they
Yeah.
open Facebook.
Right.
I mean, to me, I'm like, how sad is that?
Yeah.
So we want there to be something there that pulls them back to either our weather app or TV. And so, some little blurb about, hey, it's going to be really nice today. That doesn't get many people to tune in, but hey, there could be snow. Well, that gets their attention,
Sure.
or severe weather. And that's just the nature of it. When the weather's looking bad, more people are interested in it, and I'm having my most fun.
Well, we've seen the bloopers on TV of usually a weather person using the green screen where they're kind of standing off to the side. And do I have it right that you're pointing at a screen, but you're looking at a monitor that's out of view and you can kind of see, is that how
Yes.
that typically goes? Is that hard to get to use? I mean, is that to get your groove on that? Is that pretty difficult?
It's been so long.
Yeah. You've been doing it for a
I,
while.
I don't remember. Now it's so
Mm.
second nature.
Yeah.
I step up there. And so you're right. There's monitors on both sides of the screen
Okay.
that are off view of the camera. And so and when I look at the camera, there's a monitor there. So as long as those are on, I'm good. I can pretty easily point at something or draw lines or whatever it is, without really thinking too much about it. You can always tell when somebody's a little bit green, no pun intended.
Right.
Um, it's not natural. The
Yeah.
goal is to make it look like I'm actually looking at something behind me. It doesn't always work that well. That's kind of how we do it. And there are ways now that we can sort of interact with the imaginary screen behind us, based on the camera signal going into the computer, so that our finger becomes a mouse pointer and
Hmm.
the clicker that we hold is like the mouse. And so that's how we can, during severe weather coverage, hit little buttons that appear on the screen. They're not really there, but it allows us to control certain functions of the computer without ever walking off the wall.
Okay. What type of person you mentioned a minute ago that you ad lib, your
Mhm.
broadcast essentially. So someone that does your line of work is obviously, I would assume that they're mostly an extroverted person or they can really fake it well to be upbeat and bubbly and, because nobody wants to just sit there and listen to a monotone weather report.
Sure.
So are most of the folks that do your line of work or that are in broadcasting like that, are they naturally extroverts?
To an extent, I think
Yeah.
there's a certain number of people that want to do it, but it's not real natural for them. The
Mm,
ones that are best at it, number one, experience teaches you a lot, and that's in any
sure.
business or
Sure.
any career. But the more you do it, the better you get at it, hopefully.
Yeah.
But, you know, here's the thing about me, I can get up there in front of a camera and just yak my head off. I tell people all the time, my wife works in healthcare as an executive, and she deals with a lot of stuff. Her brain hurts, and she she's got a lot of people under her that report to her. She works hard versus me. I point and talk for a living. So, I really enjoy what I do, but it's not nearly as hard as what she does. But,
Yeah.
you know, I can talk, I can blab about the weather, but it's something I love. And
Right.
so when I go to work and I do the forecast, I essentially have the background for telling a story. And that's all I'm doing. So I get on front of the camera and I can say, hey, here's how cold it is right now. It's going to warm up later today. I'm just telling people a story about what the weather is expected to do. And to me, it's relatively easy. It's a little harder when you're talking about severe weather because it's all fly by the seat of your pants
Yeah.
as it unfolds. But that too is essentially using the data at your fingertips to tell a story and hopefully keep people in or out of danger. But if I were given the choice between going to, for instance, a social event with a bunch of people I don't know, or sitting on the couch and watching a movie, I'll pick the couch every time.
Mm,
So it's not that I can't interact with people and, shake hands and, as the old saying goes, shake hands and kiss babies or whatever that is.
right. Yeah. Mingling. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can do it, but it's not, some people are much more comfortable with that end of it than others. And I'm probably one that's less comfortable. Put me in a studio with a camera, great. Put me in a big crowd of people I don't know, I'm not nearly as comfortable. I can get up and do public speaking, but it's probably not something that I would pick most of the time.
If someone came to you, let's say you have a high school student, and I'm thinking about my oldest son that I mentioned earlier has just been a weather fanatic since he was, barely able to walk. If someone came to you and said, I want to follow in your footsteps, I want to get into weather, what two or three key pieces of advice would you give to them that maybe is something that you look back and go, If I could do that over, I would do that differently because of X, Y, and Z?
Well, I think, the business of broadcasting in general has changed a lot
Hmm.
just in the last 10 years, in the sense that, number one, there is so much competition just to get people's attention.
Yeah.
The days of people sitting in front of the TV watching the newscast, they're not gone. There are just fewer people that do it. They'll still watch. And in our little corner of the country here, or not really corner, but you know what I mean,
Yeah.
we have not had as much of a change as some of the major cities and things are. But the truth is, we compete for people's attention and we try to hit them at every avenue we can with information, whether that's social media or the apps on their phone, and certainly broadcast and the web and so on, to get them the information that they want. The business now, if you watch KY3, there are a lot of our reporters who are in their 20s. It may be their first job, it may be their second. But, whereas, for instance, a reporter may have started at a station like Joplin or Columbia and then stepped up to KY3, there are some places like in St. Louis and Kansas City that are hiring straight out of college now.
Wow.
So it's very, very different than it used to be, which makes it that much more difficult for a smaller station to recruit because why would somebody want to start in Springfield if they could start in St. Louis?
Sure.
So that's that element to it. But as far as weather's concerned, there was a time frame where you had to have a degree in meteorology if you wanted a job because there were a lot of them. And if an employer could pick from someone who had a degree or not, they're probably going to lean toward the degree unless The person without it was better on camera.
Hmm.
So, for the very basic level, better off to have a meteorology degree or atmospheric sciences or something like that. Because when it comes down to it, you got to know what you're doing or what you're talking about when it comes to weather, because that's kind of your job. On the other hand, television is entertainment at some level. I mean,
Hmm.
news is a little bit different,
Yeah.
but 9 times out of 10, the information I'm giving people is a matter of convenience. How cold is it going to be? How warm is it going to be? Do I need my big coat? Is it going to rain on my weekend? Versus, hey, a tornado's headed towards you. That becomes an issue of safety, and people tune in and they have a level of trust. But the comment I get more often than not when I'm out in public is, hey, I really like watching you in the morning. You and Chad are funny.
Yeah.
So people watch people because they can relate to them, or they find them humorous, or they like the jokes I throw in when I'm talking to my co-anchors, or they like the way I explain the weather, or whatever it is. So there is a very good balance that I think has to be achieved to be successful in it, between being relatable to people and being comfortable on camera, and knowing the science of weather so that you can create at least a good level of accuracy on the day-to-day forecast. Because if people can't trust what I tell them as far as the forecast is concerned, if I'm consistently missing it big, they're going to turn to a different place pretty quick.
Right.
But if I'm really accurate and have the personality of a bump on a log, they're not going to watch that either. So you got to have a balance between the two so that your forecast is at least accurate enough on a day to day basis. And we do pretty good that they'll keep watching. And most people know that it's not exact science. And if I say 58 today and it gets to 56, I'll be upset about it. But most
Yeah.
people won't really know the difference.
Sure.
If I say it's going to be sunny and it ends up raining on them, which has happened, they're not going to like that too much, but they understand, hey, things change. There was a pop up storm, there was a low chance, but I got under it, that type of thing. So I think there is an avenue certainly there for study. Math and science is the big thing if you're going to go get a degree, but there's also got to be a way that, whether it be through public speaking or speech and debate and that type of thing, where you're comfortable in front of people, to do public speaking and be in front of a camera, in front of people. Because if you don't have that, you're not going to succeed in television.
Yeah. What type of math do you typically use when you're doing the meteorology side of your job?
You know what? In the day to day operation, none.
Hmm.
It's all computer driven because there's so much of it.
Yeah.
I mean, the atmosphere is a fluid and the laws of physics apply. So think about it. The example I use is, if you're in a canoe and you push off into a stream and you put your paddle in the water, a computer is trying to figure out how fast the stream is flowing and where your canoe is going to go and where every little eddy in the water is going to go based on how you move your paddle. That's a very loose analogy, but think of that over the entire globe, and that's essentially what we're trying to figure out. So, in terms of weather, it is so complicated, and we're trying to tell the future. So,
Well, the math, you may not be using the math day to day, but it would
mhm,
help you understand what is going on with
yes,
this. Okay.
when you get a degree in meteorology or atmospheric science, the coursework is going to involve trigonometry, algebra, certainly, differential equations. I mean, it makes your head hurt.
Yeah.
It helps you understand, what are models looking at? What do I know about how the atmosphere behaves? And that's what the computers are using to forecast what the atmosphere may look at or look like in 1 day, 2 days, whatever it is. And it helps to know the background of that, but there's no way that you could possibly keep up with it doing it by hand. So it's
Mm.
the background thing, but you do it to get the degree.
Yeah.
And then once you get into forecasting itself, that it's just not something you do on a day-to-day thing. It's kind of like you
The
have to trudge through the mud to get to the end of it,
yeah.
but it's just part of the deal.
The education that you talked about, there was the correspondence course, which I'm assuming is online now through, was it Mississippi University or
Mississippi
University of
State.
Mississippi State? Are there colleges or universities aside from the one in Mississippi you just mentioned that if you're wanting to get a meteorological or what did you call atmospheric science, I think was the other one that you
Yeah,
mentioned. Are there certain schools like I'm thinking of OU or somebody over in Tornado Alley? Is that where folks typically go for that?
a lot of them do. And OU, they have Oklahoma City / Norman
Hmm.
is where the National Weather Service headquarters are. Well, not headquarters, but the National Weather Center is what they call it. The Storm Prediction Center. So tornado watches, severe thunderstorm watches, they monitor severe weather potential round the clock. They're located in that building.
Hmm.
The Weather Prediction Center, when they're talking about heavy rain, heavy snow, icing, that type of thing, that's in that building. National Center for Atmospheric Research, I believe, has part of their operation there. National Severe Storms Lab, so we're talking research into severe weather, tornadoes, they're in that building.
Good grief.
And I think OU itself is in that building now. And it's a really nice facility. I've never been to it, but all that stuff's headquartered down there. The National Radar Test Bed, where they're and have been testing for 20 years something called phased array radar. All that stuff is down there, and they do chasing. So it's a good school, a good program, but it's not the only program.
Right.
Mizzou has a program
Oh,
up in Columbia, and a very
okay.
good one. In fact, they have their own TV station. They have their own radar, and it's a nice studio. Abby Dyer, you may remember her. She
Yeah.
went there. Oh, golly, I'm trying to think of who else went there that we had working here. I think it was Leah Hill. She's now in St. Louis. But a lot of good graduates have come from there. So there
Hmm.
are a lot of schools around, but those are the two closest ones I can think of.
What types of soft skills do you see the people that are successful in your line of work? I know we talked about the extrovert and the introvert kind of a thing, but
Mhm.
are there any soft skills, those intangibles that some people have where you just look at them and think they're going to go far? They've got something, they've got it.
There's a lot to be said for just the way you handle yourself with other people, interpersonal skills,
Okay.
because the best situation you can be in is when you have a good relationship with your coworkers. Because really, well, I won't say in any field, but especially in television, if you're on the front of the camera, there's a whole lot of people you're working with to make that happen. So
Yeah.
those relationships are important. And I think in almost any field nowadays, but the more understanding you have of technology,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to computers and smartphones and all that kind of stuff, the better off you're going to be.
Mhm.
I know enough to be dangerous. I mean, that's a cliche saying, but it really is true. Years ago, before we had switched to Windows based computer systems, we had a Linux or Linux or however you pronounce it based
Mhm.
system, which is all command code. I fished around in the software trying to create some code that would do certain things. I don't remember the specifics of it, but I bricked the machine. It wouldn't
Shut down
boot.
the weather.
Yeah, it wouldn't boot. And so I had to call customer support. And that we had this guy named Glenn Villiard. He was up in Boston. And so we had to, he parked his car and they went into his
Mhm.
office, and he was so fun. And he retired years ago. But here's the kind of guy he was. We would have to call when there was an upgrade available for the software. Hey, Glenn, I'm ready for the upgrade. You sure you want to do that? So I had to call him and say, Glenn, the computer won't boot. There's this long silence. And he was really good, but he couldn't figure it out. he had to get somebody higher than him, and they worked at it for a while and finally got it fixed. And he said, Brandon, back away from the Dell. So there's enough that everything's IT now. One computer's got to talk to the next. If you can help troubleshoot that kind of stuff, it can really be helpful.
Yeah.
But that type of thing, I mean, typing, one of the things that I feel like has kind of gone by the wayside is that so many young people, especially, are so tied to their phones. I got a request from a student a few years ago that wanted to do a job shadow. He emailed me from his phone, and I knew it was from his phone because his entire request was one giant run on sentence with no punctuation.
Oh, I've gotten those.
And I'm like, dude,
It's
and
brutal.
I was just blunt with him. And I said, look, you're making a request to a business professional and you're doing it with zero grammar and punctuation. That's not going to fly.
Right.
You're going to have to know how to communicate properly. And this isn't it.
Yeah.
And that's not the teacher's fault, that by any means, but that's changed. And so, knowing how to communicate, how to write a letter still, and you may
Yeah.
do it over email, but it's the same general idea.
Hmm.
Those kinds of things can get lost. And I think that's important for any field, really.
Sure. The question of pay, people always like to wonder, what
Oh, yeah.
does the job pay? And I know that you're dealing with a couple of different careers that are merged into one as far as being on television, but also uh, doing meteorology. So, what types of pay, if someone is just graduating from MSU and Columbia or from OU and they want to get a job, let's say at a television station, or they want to get a job for the National Weather Service or whatever, do you have any idea what those jobs typically start out at, ballpark?
Well, I can tell you what our company, so Gray Television owns KY3
Okay.
and television stations all over the country, from Alaska to Hawaii.
Wow.
I think they are the number 3 group now, and they have acquired. It's becoming a lot of big fish in a pond now versus the smaller companies now. But
Hmm.
they, I believe, 2 years ago made their starting wage $18 an hour.
Okay.
So when you multiply that out, that comes out to a little over 37,000.
Okay.
Now, in today's world, if you're single, that's fantastic. You're
Sure.
not going to raise a family on that.
No.
So that said, it's a highly, how do I say, it's a different field than it used to be. It is possible to move up, but you have to be good at what you do.
Hmm.
You can't just be average. And that's very subjective, of course, but you have to find a way to stand out. And probably, in my opinion, excellence is the best way to do that. You have to be diverse in your skill set. The more you know how to do, so you can't just come in as a reporter and say, hey, that's great. I'm going to get a job and go far and make a lot of money. Well, probably not. Can you edit? Can you shoot? Because that's almost a no brainer now. It's a one man band type of thing because technology is so good now that we used to have a satellite truck to do a live shot. Now we got to have a backpack with a cell signal.
Yeah.
Cell phones shoot 4K video. It's just not as difficult as it used to be to do that sort of stuff. But the trade off is you got to set up your story, you got to shoot it, you got to edit it, you got to write it. And then creativity, coming up with story ideas. When it comes to weather, again, you've got to have a very strong on camera presence. And it helps if you're sexy. I don't know how I got into the business. I make that joke, but I think I'm grandfathered in.
Yeah, yeah. I got a face
Yeah.
for radio. That's why I'm doing a podcast. So,
Yeah. I've actually said on the air, I said, one of these days they're going to take me out to pasture and shoot me. I don't think I said shoot me, but
right.
the old joke.
Yeah.
But the better you are at your craft, the farther you're going to be able to go.
Sure.
And in my case, when I first started, people in general don't like change. And I remember getting, of course, it wasn't email yet, but I remember a letter that came in that said I was the worst excuse for a weatherman KY3 had ever had.
My goodness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course, that hurt my feelings.
Right.
But the people that had been in the business for a while said, don't worry about it. You're going to get that kind of stuff for a while. And
Yeah.
now I'm the one telling people that are starting in the business when they get nasty emails or whatever. And it's worse for women. But I say, hey, look, don't worry about it. They're sitting behind a computer. They have an opinion, but so does everybody.
Yeah.
And, the people that are most vocal about it, like I would have never thought about emailing somebody on TV and saying, hey, I don't like your suit.
Yeah.
Well, so what if you don't like my suit?
Yeah.
Go do something on your own. But I think that there's probably something there's probably something to be said for having a bit of thick skin when it comes to television, because one way or another, you're gonna tick people off. They're
Yeah.
not gonna like something you say or something you wear or whatever it may be. My thing now for weather people is the conspiracy about chemtrails and geoengineering.
Oh. Oh
That
my
could be a whole
goodness.
separate podcast.
Yeah, it could.
But that's become more of a thing lately. Eh, Several weeks ago, I had somebody that their email said they had a question when really it wasn't that. It was several paragraphs of accusatory language that basically said I had a non disclosure agreement with the government and that I should come clean for the sake of my eternity and tell the truth.
Man, good grief.
I replied firmly and kindly, I think, but the bottom line is people will read something online and you can't convince them otherwise.
Yeah.
So I got off on a little tangent there, but that's
No.
the business as a whole. The more experience you have, the better it's going to be for you. I gave you the starting salary. Once you get up to network level, if you ever get that far, very few people do.
Mhm.
When it comes to network anchors, they're in the millions.
Right.
I have no idea about correspondents and reporters. I just don't know. Um, Back when I started, the average for somebody in my field in my general city size was about 45,000. But that did not take into account, years of experience. The company you work for makes a difference.
Mhm.
I can tell you that as a general rule, most of the folks in my peer group, we have a Facebook page for the meteorologist just in my company. And the general sentiment is we are being asked to do more with less. And I think that may be just across the board nowadays.
Yeah, it is.
And we want to pay you less because, everything's more expensive.
Yeah.
And that's the case for every business, every person. And we all want to save as much as we can. And so the bottom line comes down to how can you make yourself more marketable and more valuable to your company? And however you can do that, the more likely you are to command a good salary. And in television land, people tend to like you the more feedback that you get. And in our, television stations will do research. They'll have consultants come in or research firms that will ask viewers what they like, what they don't like. That can go a long way too. But that goes off. I've been here 28 years now, almost 29. And so now it will be rare to come across somebody that hasn't at least heard of me. That
Mhm.
can be good and bad.
Right. Yeah.
I'm very thankful to do what I do. I'll tell you, when I started in 1996, weekend weather and doing promotions within the building 3 days a week, my salary was 19,500.
Hmm.
When I got that offer, I was like, well, I don't know if that's good or not, but it's a job in the field. Okay, sure. I could have gone down the street and worked at a convenience store and made more than that.
Yeah, but you love what you do. How much is that worth?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
the earning potential
Yes.
was much higher in my business.
Right.
And now, being in here 29 years, there's no way I could duplicate the living I make now in another field and enjoy what I do. I mean, like I said, I get paid to point and talk, and I have a great time doing it. Most mornings when that alarm goes off at 2:30, well, I can't say I jump out of bed, but
Yeah.
I'm excited to go to work. I like who I work with, and there's a lot to be said for that. You can make a lot of money in some jobs, but if you hate going to it you're not going to be happy.
I just thought of a question. When you go on vacation, do you go to a place that I want to go to the most boring weather place? I go to Arizona where it's just hot all the time. And I don't, or do you go somewhere like you go over to Texas or somewhere in Tornado Alley and just, live it up?
I've never made a vacation out of weather.
Oh, okay.
I have chased a little bit around here, but I've never made a drive specifically to do it.
Hmm.
Most times around here, if it's bad enough to chase, it's bad enough for me to be at work.
Right. Yeah.
I just don't get that opportunity very. If I happen to be somewhere and there's a potential for that kind of weather, I'd probably go out and look for it. But I'm not the kind that'll drive across the country. I just don't have that kind of patience. It's fun to look at. I'll probably see a video of it at some point anyway. And I know that's not the same as being in front of it, but
Well, it's a lot easier.
my vacation plans are typically just where can I go to enjoy nature.
Yeah.
My wife and I have only been married for a little over 3 years. I had a prior marriage that was a little over 20, but we won't go into that whole story.
Mm.
My wife has a goal, and so now it's my goal to go to
Funny how that
all the
works.
national parks.
Cool. That's a good one.
Yeah, but that's a lofty goal. There's a lot of them. And we've only been to a handful so far. But last year we went to Glacier National Park and did
Oh,
kind of a
yeah.
loop through Yellowstone.
Yes.
And we've been to Rocky Mountain National Park. That's actually where I proposed to her.
Mm.
And so, that's a fun thing we can do together. We both love nature. We both love being out in it. We love to kayak. We love to fish, that type of stuff. So it'll be a fun thing to try to do that. So I think this year we're going to try to do four, not
Mm.
4 trips, but 4 parks. And you can
Right.
usually, if you pack them in there, you can do that in a week to 10 days. So,
I think I could do a whole other podcast just on the national parks. My
oh, I'm
family and I
sure.
went to Yellowstone and Glacier a couple of times 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I've never been to a place in nature that was so impressive like Yellowstone. It blew my mind.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love I love national parks. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
It's very, very pretty. And I'm excited to go to some of them. I've only been to a handful, like I said, but all of them
yeah,
are somewhat unique. And,
right.
you can fill up a phone with pictures pretty quick.
Yeah, you can. If someone came to you that they were new in your line of work and maybe you were kind of mentoring them and they came in and said, I made a mistake. I failed in some way or another. What type of advice would you give someone new to your business about how to deal with failure?
The only kind of failure, in my opinion, speaking specifically to television, that would end a career would be you would have to do it on purpose.
Yeah.
Whether that be swearing on the air, which,
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully it's not so natural to you that it comes out without thinking about it.
Hmm.
When it comes down to, making a mistake with a forecast or, getting tongue tied on the air or something like that, those kinds of things, that's just going to happen. It's part of it.
Sure. We're
I,
human.
yeah. And it still bothers me if I really miss a forecast bad,
Hmm.
but I also know that, that's just part of the business I'm in and I'll get up the next day and do it. But when I'm trying to think of an example of failure as far as television goes that would be, more specific to that field. The bottom line is my employers have told me if you make a mistake that gets us in trouble, we're going to back you up unless it was something you did knowingly. And that even includes, if it has to be legal.
Right.
And I can't think of a specific example that would qualify for that. But I think the basic gist of it is that you're going to fail at some point,
Yeah.
and more than once, honestly. It's not like, hey, you're early in your career. Oh, you failed. Okay, good. That's over. You don't have to worry
Right.
about that again.
Yeah.
Chances are you're going to become good at what you do through failing. What are you going to learn from each of those mistakes that will help make you better? Part of weather forecasting in terms of success is learning from the times you miss it.
Yeah.
Okay, what happened there? You're not always going to figure it out, but failure, I think, is inevitable. And having a good group of people around you, a group of peers to help pick you up and encourage you, I think that's a lot of it.
I had a captain very early in my fire career that gave me some advice about failure because I made some mistakes being new. It's part of it. And some of those things they would percolate in my mind. And I thought,
Hmm.
man, I just can't seem to get past this mistake. And he pulled me aside and he said, you need to learn how to fail fast. You are going to make mistakes. It's part of being a human being. Okay, let's rectify it, learn from it, and then you've got to develop the ability to move on.
Yeah,
If you don't ever get past that mistake, it's just going to keep owning you for however long you dwell on it. And
yeah,
I've taken that to heart. So,
sure.
if you were not in your current career, was there another career that early on I heard a rumor that you're really into fireworks. I don't know if that's something that you would want to do for a living, but was there another career that you kind of had your eye on the side?
As a kid, I thought I wanted to study volcanoes.
Oh, cool.
I guess geologist would be where that is. In the third grade, I wrote a report on Mount St. Helens
Hmm.
because it blew up in 1980, and I remember researching that, and it still fascinates me. That was long before we had real good video,
Yeah.
but that kind of thing still fascinates me. I remember there was a time I wanted to be a chef.
Okay.
So that went away pretty quick. Now I still like to cook every now and then, but just to give you an example, I remember as a kid, I wanted some French toast. I thought, well, I'll make it. So I put some bread in the toaster and then poured hot syrup on it. You can kill somebody with that. Like, you can't get a knife through that stuff. It's amazing. But anyway, I still like to bake every now and then, but that went away in favor of the fascination with weather.
Yeah.
I used to think, you know what, I would be a teacher. I loved it. For a time, I was able to go out and visit schools pretty frequently. And anywhere between about second and sixth grade, they weren't yet to the point where they already knew everything, but the younger ones, they weren't so young that they couldn't get it.
Right.
And I would have a blast with those kids, and I'd make them laugh and yet teach them some things about weather. Now that's, it's kind of like, I'm not a grandparent yet, but it's kind of like being a grandparent where you can sugar up the grandkids and send them home.
Yeah. All the perks and none of the
I
responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, I could go in there and take a group of kids and make them laugh and have fun and then leave. I don't know if I would have been successful as a day in, day out teacher,
Hmm.
but that fascinated me for a while. And I honestly, I don't know what else it would be.
Do you get a lot of younger people that are showing interest in weather? Does that happen very often? Or kids come up to you, teenagers come up to you and start talking about cumulus clouds and whatever else? My son's always rattling stuff like that off.
Yeah, on occasion, I
Yeah.
wouldn't say it's a lot,
Hmm.
but on occasion I do. Yeah, that. that are either fascinated with it, or on occasion there's somebody, I'll get an email from a parent that says their son or daughter is terrified of storms,
Hmm.
and debilitatingly so. And I've extended an invitation, said, hey, bring him in and I'll show him how we do what we do. And that'll be kind of cool for him, but also explain how those things work and how we track them and how we monitor them and why they don't need to be afraid of them.
Hmm.
And more times than not, that has really helped him.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I was looking forward to this conversation because like I said, my oldest son has been into weather since a young age. And so I'll say hi to Cooper. I know he's going to love listening to this interview, but
Oh,
I,
yeah.
I really thank you for taking the time. I know you've had an early morning and broadcasting and everything, but I really enjoyed our conversation. Brandon, you expressed a lot of great information, shared a lot of good stuff. So
Oh,
thank
sure.
you
My
very much.
pleasure.
All
I
right.
appreciate the invitation. And I think this is only the second or third time I've done a podcast. So
Really?
it's been kind of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we watch you all the time at the firehouse. So, give a shout out to the folks at Fire Station 8. So
All right. I'll do it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
you bet. Have a good day.
You too.
And that wraps up another episode of the Jobs Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully you found that interesting. As always, I wait until the end of an interview to ask you to like, subscribe, and share. I feel it's important that I earn that support from you. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.